kicking us off in Serious Country's Newsmaker this week, there is an Our Land and Water white paper that has been released today on regenerative agriculture. The report has had more than 200 contributors from all parts of New Zealand's food systems. The report suggests that regenerative agriculture has been proposed as a solution for some of Aotearoa New Zealand's most acute challenges. And it is something that I do believe there is commonalities, and that is what is here around our challenges, the health of our waterways, reducing topsoil loss, resilience to drought. How do we add value to our primary exports, as well as, of course, the wellbeing crisis among rural farming communities? We're joined now by Landcare Researcher Senior Scientist Dr. Gwen Grelet and Quorum Sense Manager Sam Lang. Thank you so much for coming into the studio, both of you. And I mean, what a opportune time to continue the conversation. On Serious Country over the last couple of weeks, we've had Maury Leyland Pino and Professor John Hickford on an opinion maker around regenerative agriculture. We've also last week heard from Dave Maslin from New Zealand Merino on the RX framework for ZQ, which I know you have had a lot to do with as well, Sam. So to carry on and the conversation around, well, what is regenerative agriculture? Are we already regenerative? To now see that there is some significant science funding to find the evidence that everybody's wanting to cling on to so much, to get to a point of this white paper stage with Our Land and Water. Sam, can you talk us through what's been involved, particularly in the last year of collecting over 200 members of the farming community's opinion and insights into this to get you started?
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Erin. I suppose this is, for Gwen and I, we've been working together for 3 or 4 years now, so this is a culmination of lots of that work. But I suppose the last 12 months we were looking at what the pathway was to actually start testing some of the ideas and the anecdotal evidence that was coming from the farmer community, and actually develop some research pathways and investment frameworks for that. And what we realised was there was so much uncertainty about the term and the label, which we completely understand that. The idea we had, and it wasn't just us, was perhaps we can actually do a smaller piece of work, which we probably thought was going to be a little bit shorter than 12 months, to really set the scene and identify those in a really collaborative way to actually help map out what that pathway could be, which I think we've got there, which is great.
Mm. Gwen, as a scientist, how's it been navigating the science community to come to this point yourself?
It's been a really interesting journey. I've personally learned a lot. I think my organization has also learned a lot. It's been a really rewarding journey. So when I first met Sam, it was almost swimming at a counter current, whereas now there is a huge willingness amongst the whole of New Zealand, Aotearoa, to really question what is regenerative agriculture, what has it got to offer to us as a country, and what can we offer to the world. And so what we actually found is we had a lot of support from many people, and a lot of support from the scientific organization. So it's been really quite a rewarding journey. The way we've decided to go about the work with doing that many collaboration with loads of many people has brought some challenges that have exposed some of the organizational and structural challenges that probably we might want to have a look at if we're serious about transforming our food and fiber system. But that's beyond the point of that white paper, of course. And it was really interesting for us.
Yeah, and we talked about the challenges, and within the white paper that I've got sort of the base of a summary here is that the consultation found many areas of strong agreement across the sector. What were some of those areas where we can find commonality around our challenges, but also the outcomes we're seeking?
Yeah, well, I think there's lots of the conversations, and it's increasingly becoming clear that when we talk about what we want as a country, and doesn't matter who you're talking to, generally those outcomes are the same. So that was an obvious piece, and we've put some kind of detail around what it means to the people that we consult in terms of what regenerative outcomes might be. And generally, rather than it's not excluding any, it's just thinking about that breadth of things, and recognizing that the health of our people is connected to our waterways, etc. Other areas of common ground, we looked at the practices, for example. So there's lots of talk around, lots of the practices that people look at overseas and say, rotational grazing is what they do overseas in regenerative agriculture. Is that what we do in New Zealand? There's lots of areas where that is the case, and then there's some where the regenerative farming community, which is where I spend a lot of my time, are doing things that you wouldn't call mainstream, and those typically align with a set of farming principles that you'll be familiar with, and some people are around working with living ecosystems and increasing diversity and things like that. So
and finding these compatibilities of mainstream practices across pastoral and arable systems, there seems to be, as we continuously talk about among ourselves, that things we're doing such as rotational grazing and perennial pastures with a mix of grass and legumes is fantastic. We do that already here. It is compatible with regenerative agriculture, adoption of no-till arable systems. I went to a strip-till day the other day. Fantastic what FAR are doing in that space. I mean, there are so many things we are compatible, yet things in terms of high rates of synthetic fertilizers and fallow opportunities with fallowing in arable, that there is work to do. So how do you move forward to refine our current systems as opposed to the science behind something that many say is a fad in the US?
Can I ask you to clarify your question? I'm hearing two questions here. One is how do we refine the current system that we have now to make them better? And then the other one is the science that is found elsewhere and coming from overseas studies relevant to New Zealand? Is that, have I heard that?
It is, because, to refine something that is operational overseas and say that we are different here in New Zealand. I feel like we want to refine what we currently do and tick a box, but there are some compatibilities and there's some not. How do we create a framework to acknowledge what we're already doing?
Yep. So how we create that framework is beyond the scope of the study we've done. Right. So what we were really trying to identify is what was really the top priority, where we should invest our efforts. And that is one of the top priority that came out, which is we are aware that there are loads of practices that have been tested overseas. Are they applicable to New Zealand? And if they are not, can they be adapted to suit our different context? And it goes beyond looking at what's overseas versus what's in New Zealand. It also looks at what might work in Otago or in Hawke's Bay or in Canterbury. Everything is very much context specific. That's one of the principles that emerged from the consultation with the practitioners, is that really each farm is unique and the context is unique. So departing from the one size fits all is one of the key principle that we exposed. And so people are really asking for these tailored context-specific practice guides. And so how we go about doing that, what we recommend is that has to be done in collaboration between the scientists, industry, the farmers, because everybody has a piece to contribute.
And Sam, what is the outcome that you would love to see the conversation being in the next 12 months, following on another 12 months of work from this particular white paper?
Well, I think it's one of the things that's been quite clear is that words like regenerative and the contention within that, they're kind of a bit of a distraction from, as we dive quite deep in the conversations, that you put that to a side and you talk about what people the outcomes that they want, or how farmers are farming and the practices they're using, for example, and that those high level terms become less relevant, and you get into the practicalities, and this kind of mainstream versus regenerative thing. It's a bit of a in reality there's this big continuum of practice that all farmers are doing, and it's all different, and lots of the farmers that consider themselves regenerative are doing lots of practices that they've done for a very long time, and some that don't consider themselves regenerative might be doing things that others do. So I think the opportunity that we're trying to set out here is we've actually developed some frameworks, and probably one of the main focus areas is actually how we go about the science farmer partnerships to explore what opportunities might actually exist in this space. And if they don't stack up, then they don't stack up. But if there are some possibilities, we know that the pressures on farmers are changing and increasing all the time, whether it's regulation or markets or climate, etc. So the world's changing, our farming systems need to change. And we've got a bunch of farmers that are really, I think Maury last week used the word, innovation mindset, performance mindsets. And so how do we actually kind of redesign our science system to actually work with that and leverage that innovation rather than at the moment, there's a bit of defensiveness and uncertainty. So that's kind of what we're trying to cut through. So hopefully with MPI's regenerative ag fund, which is out at the moment, and there's lots of other people getting interested in actually exploring this, then hopefully what this does is it sets out a bit of guidance around how we might go about that.
Yeah, you talked about the structure of the science community and also our industry structures to be able to accommodate the term, so to speak, but let alone the scientific research into this way of the life cycle and the ecosystem of a farm. It's very different from the outcomes that we normally do with our science research. Can you explain to our audience about why it is so difficult for our science community to get their head around?
So as a scientist, we the amount of knowledge and understanding that we need to gain for us to be an expert in our field is quite a challenge. And so the tendency is to become specialist in one particular area. And that specialty becomes more and more narrow for many of us as we progress in our career, in the manner that we acquire in the work that we're doing. And the issue we have here is that all outcomes and all challenges associated with these outcomes are tangled up, and it's all an interaction. There's nothing that is really disconnected from the rest. So as a scientific community, at the moment, most of our science system, that's not all of it, to be absolutely fair. Most of our science system is designed to favor that sort of in-depth expertise. How do you then join the dots between that? Because for every single individual scientist, it's a challenge to start, walking a path which is outside of our zone of comfort and expertise, right? So how do we transition to a space where we can merge and integrate all of these different parts together so we actually look at the whole? It's a challenge that is not only faced by the New Zealand community, it's pretty much everywhere in the world. And for the industry, I would say a similar kind of perhaps maybe not to the same extent, and I probably don't know enough about it, but functioning from a really, really focusing on the outcome and on particular topic and areas means that looking at the whole system becomes a little bit more difficult. So one example would be you might put a lot of effort in promoting your biodiversity outcome. And on the side, that will maybe impact on what you can deliver for, your freshwater outcome or, your pollution outcome. That's, I don't know what is the trade-off, but you know what I mean. And the tendency is to go really, really deep in one topic because it's much easier to do that. And I think that's where we really need to have a look together. And the same applies to the global food system. Like a lot of people are saying that it's how everything is interconnected that is the challenge. How we're going to work together on these multiple issues.
And Sam, when it comes to the economics behind it, there's a lot of people wanting economic analysis on is this the right direction, and the structure of how we retain and attract capital into the sector has a whole different way of operating in terms of going down a path that is unknown and therefore it doesn't have defined science around it. Is part of this, or where will it be that there will be financial modelling outcomes with profit margins because of lower inputs, etc., and tangible examples for farmers to feel confident that they're either on the right track already or there is more work to be done and it does have a payoff?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm the best person to ask about who and where that work's going to be done. I guess personally, I'm one of my jobs is working with farmers all across the country that are playing in this space. So I hear about, and sometimes I see numbers and we call it anecdotal evidence at the moment, and you see positive things, but can that be extrapolated to other farmers? And I think what you're getting at there is there's a lot of risk associated with doing something unknown. So how do we de-risk that so farmers can have more confidence in trying something different, if that's what they want to do, or on the flip side, just increase their success. Because inherently, what we're seeing is that with the innovation, there's a lot of failure and learning that come along before we get to the point where these systems sometimes function. So yeah, I guess that's just got to be part of the work we do. And I suppose one of the kind of methodologies that we've been working on is, rather than trying to set up a whole lot of demonstration and model farms and that, and start in year 1 and take to year 5, and because it's things take a long time to shift at times, then can scientists actually get alongside farmers around the country that already have some historical data, what they're currently doing and where they're heading, and can we actually learn a bit faster and use that kind of wide and diverse body of farm knowledge and experience to do that. And that's not easy, because then how do you control for all the different things that farmers are doing? And that comes to some of our recommendations in here around actually focusing on individual practices can potentially be quite misleading because they're so context specific, like how one farmer cover crops in Southland might be very different to Northland or Central Canterbury, for example. So are we better to focus more on the principles that farmers are trying to apply and work with that? So are they working with diversity? Are they working with soil health in a certain way? Or we could extend this concept to how they work with their staff and teams and families and goals and things like that as well. It's all relevant. So not an easy question and not a simple answer, sorry.
No, and I think that is one thing that has been an outcome from this interview, as well as the previous ones of the last couple of weeks, is people are trying to clamber to a black and white, because that's what we're so used to in the science community, in the financial community, of how we operate to make decisions. And when it's grey, it's scary. However, when, if it's of environmental benefit, it should reap economic rewards in a long term. But we've built a model that's so short-sighted in our decision making.
Actually, just to concur on that point, one of the things that we found from the group that work on the economic side is that we probably need to start really taking other kind of metrics much more seriously in our economic assessment. So the value of natural capital, for example, is something that we usually don't account for. And even though there's more and more corporation moving that way, I think that probably one of the change that needs to occur, because that is the problem we are facing throughout is we've caused some harm on some aspect of our landscape, our planet, and we need that to survive. And so if we don't value it, or if we don't look at the value of this in our success, then we're kind of missing a point. That's my opinion, and I think that's the opinion of many others.
Yeah, absolutely. Wouldn't it be great if we were incentivized to retain our soil carbon just as much as our, nutrients and things like that as well?
Well, that is what's really exciting, because there's a whole raft of other economic ventures that are coming up and looking at how can we value this natural capital without going onto a system of subsidies, which we know have got lots of flaws. And, reward for soil carbon, for example, biodiversity outcome or freshwater outcome, that's something that is not totally in science fiction and possible. It could be in the next few months to years. So it's very exciting. And what you mentioned before about the not having a black and white, but having a grey, I would kind of even go further and say this is a continuum. So instead of having a polarized discussion, which I personally find quite destructive, having the concept of a continuum where we all have something to contribute, and we all have slightly different main priority outcomes, but we're all going towards the same goal, is really, it brings hope to me. And I think that's what we all need to move forward, yeah?
Sam, just before we go, it's been an absolute pleasure having you both in studio with me. But when it comes to the likes of the work that New Zealand Merino have been doing with creating a framework that, so their suppliers such as Allbird and Icebreaker and Smartwool, they want a definition to, of course, attract a premium because the wood is of fashion to consumers internationally. What was quite rewarding was the fact that if you were on a path of regeneration and any aspect of your business, you tick the box. And so instead of wanting lots of little boxes to tick, the fact you're on a pathway to some form of improvement should be enough.
Yeah, just to be clear, I'm not part of NZ Merino formally or anything, although I do work in the same office. So, and I haven't actually listened to Dave's interview from last week yet. So, but yeah, I suppose that's kind of part of what gets people excited, and that's why I think we've experienced like quite a lot of really positive energy going about this process of with a lot of people involved, which again has its challenges, but we're often getting emails afterwards saying, oh, what an awesome conversation that was, even though we were taking them through a kind of sciencey-ish process. They just love the discussion, the exploration, the kind of the possibility that we're chasing, and that solution focus rather than focusing on the problems, focusing on the solutions, what we can do about it. I think that's part of that RX framework that they have, which is continuous improvement oriented. I think that's quite in line with a lot of that kind of that mindset, if you want to call it that. So, I think it's a positive step. But I haven't looked in depth into that, so I won't comment any more on it.
No problem. Thank you so much. And sorry if I did allude to the fact that you were involved in that process before. Sam Lang from Quorum Sense and Dr. Gwen Grelet from Manaki Whenua Landcare Research, Senior Scientist on the Our Land and Water white paper on regenerative agriculture. Just taking some time to get in more in depth with the two while we have them here in studio.